In the previous episode, while Jackson was enjoying his revenge, I was preparing mine. I did it. Jackson was kicked out of school like a bat out of hell, and on a wave of euphoria, I started working on my plan. Hi everyone. Be sure to watch the previous episodes if you haven't seen them yet. And now Emma is with you, and I have my dear sisters Chloe and Danny next in line. I was walking on thin, very thin ice. The sisters, unlike William, were able to think, even if they didn't strain themselves too much for this. Besides, there were two of them, and they walked together all the time, which made it very difficult for me. It would have been much easier to catch them singly. This time I wanted to play the card of their sense of justice and eternal desire to save the neighbor, and it's desirable not to lay myself open. I became paranoid about not getting into trouble anymore because of my own inattention. Though I really had a reason to be paranoid with my sisters. And to begin with, at our top-secret meeting of the top-secret sisters' office, I put on the agenda information that my success was not as remarkable as I would like it to be, because I had certainly been busy lately taking revenge on Jackson for my favorite sisters. I wish there was a way to improve my grades. For example, someone could climb into the headmaster's office and take a couple of clean reports not yet filled out by teachers, and then replace the real ones with them. But, of course, this is all theory. Of course, none of us would do such a thing. No. There could be no talk about it. The girls moved. Well, it wasn't in vain that I learned for so many years to speak correctly with hopeless idiots. Now they were firmly convinced that my studies suffered because of them, and knowing their aspirations. Well, yes, I've already talked about it, but that wasn't my goal at all. The fact that they consider themselves my debtors was nice, but I needed much more. I gave them not only the goal, but also the means to achieve it. I was good at it. Well, at first, the girls just nodded to my words and sighed. But at school, where up to now there had been gossip about Jackson's expulsion and his previous manipulations with Harry's works, their thoughts began to acquire a very specific direction, and I walked past them and sighed sadly, cuddling my notebooks. The most interesting thing was that my grades were great, as well as all my tests. Teachers praised me regularly as two other best students of the cohort, but the twins didn't even notice it, completely trusting my words and my sad face. Well, what can you do? Not everyone in our world is given brains. Drama happened when they broke into my room as usual, and I cried there over my English literature notebook. Chloe and Danny immediately forgot why they came, and began to comfort me in unison, and then they exchanged looks as mysteriously as possible, so that it cost me all my acting abilities not to give out a hoarse laugh on the spot. Of course, I was there when they turned to crime. It was important for me to know that my trap would slam exactly as I needed, so I just followed the twins. Oh, it wasn't difficult. They didn't even try to hide. They literally went through all the obstacles. The funny thing was that they could have succeeded. No one would have the idea that the two quietest and most obedient girls could be up to something. If so, they could have a lot of reasons to go to the headmaster's office, right? But this was what they had for me, so that no one would miss the theft for sure. I made a noise in the corridor, just dropping my books under the feet of junior high school students, who were just passing by. Everyone fell down, and the headmaster arrived at once. But when he saw that nothing was going on, he immediately disappeared in his office. And he saw something that was worthy of a painting by an artist's pen. My not-too-smart sister stood above his desk and wrote something on the report cards fitfully during school hours, right in his office, where he could return at any moment. The headmaster didn't start shouting at once just because he had really freaked out from shock. You know, this is a kind of situation where you either have to be immortal to get into a locked office without the headmaster, or completely crazy. And both options somehow didn't fit for Danny and Chloe, nice and calm girls from the back desk. But then, of course, everybody came to their senses, and there was an investigation. My parents were called to the school, and I was invited as a new relative, and other people, even from the city hall, I suppose. The question on the agenda was, what was it anyway? Well, as for me, I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that the twins showed neither with a word nor with a look that I was somehow involved in the story. On the contrary, sobbing and clinging to each other, they told me that they wanted to change their reports because their grades weren't high enough and their mother would scold them for it. There was no scandal. I suspect that even though adults pretended that everything was all right, in fact, they were still in kind of shock. The sisters weren't even expelled. They were just imposed a fine in the form of makeup work for the benefit of the school, and were just sent to all 4 winds. But at home, the Smiths were not as kind as the teachers. I think they were just tired of constant failures that hit their reputation, so they took it out on all their children. Well, except for me, of course. I wasn't guilty of anything. The girls were sent to their room and locked in. Meanwhile, my mother arranged a real interrogation for me. No, nobody accused me. My mother was interested in something else. She asked me whether I knew why they thought of going into the headmaster's office, and whether they asked me for help. Well, everything like that. I assured my mother that I had no idea about their plans. Despite living in the same house and having a kind of kinship, the girls and I never became friends. And they knew that I had other problems. For example, with Jackson and Terry. So, alas, I couldn't help my sisters. Neither could I do something bad for them. But I confirmed the fact that their grades were not very good. Well, I insisted that it wasn't Chloe and Danny's fault that they learnt badly. It was all because of guys who kept bullying them, even though Jackson was no longer at school. I also added that I had heard how they were interested in how Jackson had faked Terry's grades during their confrontation. I don't know if my mother believed me or not. However, she made some conclusions. But for some reason, she didn't share them with me. I was also sent to my room and asked to sit quietly. My parents had to consult and decide what to do next. Of course, I just had no right to keep my seat. As soon as Mom and Dad hid in Mom's office, my feet immediately carried me to do my favorite thing. That is, to eavesdrop. And to peek as well, if I managed to. You see, information rules the world. Yeah, our parents discussed their adopted children. Dad said that all this was expected when you take in a teenage orphan, and that they should give us all another chance. But Mom wanted to act radically. Reputation was really important to her. You know, business and all that stuff. And bad children didn't fit into that reputation in any way. They were arguing, making agreements, looking for compromises. And as a result, they decided to bring William and the twins back to the shelters. Not forever, just for a while, so that they remembered what it was like to be unwanted, if they had already forgotten that feeling. Well, it was a strange decision, as if they weren't raising children but dogs, but they decided to tell this wonderful news to the children tomorrow at lunch. Apparently, to keep them unaware and waiting for a longer time. Or maybe to spoil everyone's appetite with morning faces. I had no idea why it was necessary to leave it until tomorrow, and namely till lunch. But it didn't matter. The main thing was that I won. I could do it again. Yes, even if it was only a temporary return, my experience of previous life in the boarding school said that a couple of weeks for education could mean a total rejection of custody. So, I could go and celebrate the fact that once again, all my plans were fulfilled in the most ideal way for me. Well, of course, I just couldn't help but share it with my sisters. I would have spoiled William's mood too, but I had no way to his room. The windows of his room faced the lawn, and were perfectly visible from all sides. And for some reason, my parents didn't leave me the key, but it was easier to climb up to the girls than to reach my own room. As ill luck would have it, there was a trellis for flowers attached to their windows, but no one guessed to light the backyard for some reason. So I climbed up to my sisters by night like a shadow and you should have seen their faces. It was beautiful, like a balm for my wounded soul. When I told them that I overheard our parents talking, they weren't too scared at first, but when the conversation turned to the shelter and their return there, I wonder why the house didn't collapse because of their hysterics. Even our parents were not in a hurry to find out what kind of howling is heard in their home. But just in case, at the first signs of a sound attack, I went out the same window, and I warned them that if one of our parents asked me anything, I would say that I had not seen anything, had not heard anything, and didn't know anything. And then I locked myself in my room and just rejoiced like an insane person. I only had to wait for tomorrow's lunch and see everything with my own eyes. And help my former relatives to bring their suitcases to the car, of course. And maybe cry a bit to keep my image. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the continuation of the story.